Good afternoon. I'm John Bridgeland, co-founder and CEO of More Perfect, and welcome to our briefing on trust in Arizona elections. An enthusiastic thanks to our partners, Nick Penniman of Issue 1, Mindy Finn of Citizen Data, Don Gips, Bruce Lowry, and Tim Kahlberg of the Skoll Foundation, and all their great teams. This briefing is second in a series covering how the 2022 midterm elections influence trust in elections in the battleground states. For those who don't know, More Perfect is an initiative of 12 presidential centers from Obama to Truman, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, Karsh Institute for Democracy at the University of Virginia, and more than 100 partners. The big idea is to advance 5 sustainable democracy goals, including free and fair elections, to align leaders and institutions around concrete goals and plans to meet them by 2026, the 250th anniversary of independence and beyond. The threats to democracy have been urgent, and we can't miss a beat. Last summer, More Perfect launched Operation Restore Trust that provided targeted funding to partner organizations across 5 battleground states to educate communities about the election process and promote the professionalism and patriotism of election workers. Our partners, the Carter Center, Keep Our Republic, and the People, operated across Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia. Through a partnership with Citizen Data, we provided our partners with access to real-time voter data through their innovative new platform, Elect Protect. More Perfect and Team Democracy felt compelled to initiate a pledge that 775 candidates signed, with an equal split of Republicans and Democrats agreeing to accept election results and the peaceful transfer of power. Special thanks to Ken Powley and General Stan McChrystal on this partnership. Before I pass it over to Katie, I have to say that in public life, you occasionally see heroes, public officials who put our country before party, their oath to the Constitution before self-interest, and believe so strongly in our democratic norms, values, and systems that they put everything on the line to defend them. This is true of District 3 Supervisor for Maricopa County and outgoing Chairman of the Board of Supervisors, Bill Gates, who participated in our More Perfect launch event last May at the George W. Bush Presidential Center. And it is true of many other election officials across the country, and of my dear and good friend over 30 years, Ben Ginsberg, both of whom you'll hear from today. President Kennedy or Senator Kennedy wrote Profiles in Courage. Someone should write Election Profiles in Courage and feature these heroes. With that, I'll turn it over to Katie Fahey from the People to talk about their work through Operation Restore Trust during the 2022 midterms in Arizona. And then she'll turn it over to Citizens Data, Mindy Finn, who's been such a wonderful partner, to interview one of our very special guests. Katie?
Hi, thank you so much, John, and welcome everybody. My name is Katie Fahey. I'm joining in from Grand Rapids, Michigan. I got my start by leading the effort to end partisan gerrymandering in Michigan by establishing an independent citizens redistricting commission. From there, I have led the organization, The People. We are a national organization that focuses on helping empower everyday citizens to be at the center of making change to improve our government so that it can finally be truly of, by, and for the people. We were so excited to be a part of this project. We have many volunteers in Arizona, and thanks to More Perfect support, we were able to have a campaign that was aimed at reducing misinformation and increasing trust in the political system, helping encourage citizens to join an effort to ultimately lead to positively making change, but also participating in our elections with confidence. We accomplished this through several different avenues. We had an extensive video series that was aimed at being relatable, really focused on social media and trying a less stingy approach to how to actually talk about elections. That was a lot of fun. We did trainings, including de-escalation trainings and how to do peaceful observation at polls. And we also created digital resources and assets for citizens to access. Our information was comprehensive but state specific. And we took voters from everything from how to register to vote, how to show up to the polls, what the heck is an audit and when should it happen, and everything in between. What we found was that this content was highly sought after compared to other types of videos that have been created on things that aren't election related. There was an unusually high amount of activity for wanting to search out these topics. Citizens want to know how can they actually access the ballot and how does our election process actually work? We had tens of thousands of people who are able to connect and then also connect with us online with online resources. And we actually reached over 3% of the entire population of Arizona with just this pilot project alone. Our efforts have given us extremely valuable information on how we can, what kind of messages resonate with who's really still being missed with this type of information. And we feel confident we've learned a ton so that going into the 2024 presidential election, we'll be able to target, reach more people, and get more folks engaged in the actual process. Thanks to More Perfect, we were also able to continue a program that we had started the year before in Arizona. We were one of the founding members for something called Peace at the Polls, which were organizations joining across the state to stand up and say, you know, being American is standing for peace at the polls. And we're really appreciative. I just want to say thank you so much to Citizen Data, More Perfect, and all the event partners for helping make this a reality and allowing us to be able to continue to instill these ideals. We have such an exciting webinar today, and I'm so excited to be a part of it. I'll give you a brief overview of what will be happening before I turn it over to our other speakers. Excuse me, sorry. So you will hear from experts on Arizona elections. You'll hear next from Citizen Data's CEO, Mindy Finn, who has her team's latest polling and research coming out for the midterm elections. She'll then be joined by Maricopa County Supervisor Bill Gates for a conversation on the state of Arizona elections. After that, we'll have a panel discussion moderated by Nick Penniman of Issue 1, featuring Patty Ferguson-Bohnee, then Ginsberg, and Yvonne Wingett Sanchez. We'll end today's briefing with a few minutes for audience questions for the panel, so make sure you're marking those down as you're thinking of them. And without further ado, let's get to the juicy stuff. Mindy Finn from Citizen Data, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Katie, and thanks to the partners. It's such a pleasure to be here today with all of you. I'm going to dive right into some of Citizen's latest research and then really look forward to the conversation with Supervisor Gates thereafter. So this research, the following kind of slide, look at two sets of research that were done in Arizona. The first is from exit polling that we conducted in 5 battleground states just after the 2022 midterms in November. The second set of research involves experiments conducted in Arizona that were aimed at combating election disinformation that was spread in the lead up through the midterm elections. So first of all, just diving into the first insight here, we took a look at the issues that voters cared about across these 5 states, including Arizona. And in Arizona, you can see that 36% of voters, and this is a representative sample of likely voters, 36% listed protecting elections from partisan attempts at overturning the results as one of their top 3 most important issues. The idea that elections and democracy are not kitchen table issues were somewhat challenged by these results, as you can see that protecting elections from partisan attempts to overturn them rank right up there with abortion and immigration as top issues for voters in Arizona. This was really in the highest. If you look across these 5 states, it's notable just to underscore that in Arizona, protecting elections was even more important than in voters in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, where it also ranked quite high. Additionally, 20% of Arizona voters said that preventing a repeat of January 6th was one of their top issues in 2022. So this is more of a niche issue, and yet 20% of Arizonans which is in line with several, most of these other states, said that this was a top issue for them. In Arizona, we also found that among self-identified Republicans and independents, those who split their ticket were more likely to have indicated that the events on January 6th are one of their top 3 most important issues. So these are ticket splitter voters. This means these are voters that voted for both a combination of Democrats and Republicans for major office. And among Republicans and independents who split their ticket, they were all ticket splitters were 4% more likely to cite January 6th the top issue, but among Republicans and independents, they were 6.1% more likely to cite it as a top issue. And what this really tells us, we ask kind of, what does this mean? It means that for those Republicans who decided to split their ticket and vote for both Republicans and Democrats, kind of out of form, outside the norm, that these issues and concerns about partisan attempts to overturn elections were really top of mind and had an impact on their voting behavior. So now I'm going to transition to just look at experiments that we did in Arizona that were focused on combating specific Arizona disinformation that was promoted and spread in the buildup to the election. These are field experiments. They test the efficacy of some interventions, meaning some counter disinformation content and approaches to try to mitigate the spread of disinformation. We tracked 7 of the most prevalent pieces of mis and disinformation about the Arizona midterms on social media during the 3-month period leading up to Election Day. And then we asked participants to read a random set of debunkings to 3 of the 7 pieces of disinformation. Then we tested the extent to which positively framing election officials and workers, so positively framing the role and work of election workers, and or negatively framing the sources of the disinformation, meaning those who were behind or spreading the disinformation, impacted responses. We also measured the immediate impacts of the debunking prior to the November election. And then we followed up roughly a week after the election to determine whether treatments reduced election disinformation beliefs in the longer term. We wanted to see whether these debunking strategies, this counter disinformation, really worked for the longer term, once people already largely knew the results of the election. Here are some abbreviated examples of the content shared. Earlier research found that mythbuster messages paired with longer and more complete debunking explanations were more effective at reducing election-related disinformation beliefs than abbreviated versions. So these examples are primarily here for giving you a better idea of what each type looks like, but should be expanded upon when out in the field. And not to give away the punchline, but Supervisor Gates, who we will hear from shortly, they employed a lot of these types of approaches in their own counter disinformation and voter communication efforts. So finally, this graphic, just to make sense of it for you, depicts the impact of each treatment, expressed as Cohen's d, or a standardized mean difference, which is a typical measure used to express the impact of a social science intervention. Effect sizes of 0.2 are typically considered small, but still relevant, where those of 0.5 are considered medium. And from what we see here is that all variants resulted in lower and statistically significant declines in Arizona-focused misinformation beliefs, meaning the positive framing of election workers and officials, or the negative framing of those who were spreading disinformation. And then, both of these really impacted and worked to mitigate disinformation. And effects on Arizona-focused disinformation beliefs clearly lasted beyond end-line via recontact. And what that means in plain English is that through our pre-election test and then following up with those same people post-election, we found that combining a positive framing of election officials, the work that they're doing, the fact that they're patriots, the fact that they are dedicated to ensuring that every voter has access to the polls and that their vote is accurately counted and that we have a free, fair election that voters can have confidence in, combined with the fact that those who are spreading disinformation are trying to undermine the will of the people. So combining those kinds of themes we found to be most effective, both in the short term and even once election results had been known across for Arizona voters. So with that, that is just a kind of broad brush overview of the research that was done both in exit polling in Arizona to understand how much elections and trusted elections and election integrity were top of mind for voters, as well as understanding how we could effectively counter disinformation. And those combination, of things, I think, really led to into elections that went quite well. But don't just take my word for it. We're going to turn it over now to a special guest that we have here, who really is one of those election heroes that Bridge talked about at the top of the conversation. And that is, I'd like to welcome to the call Bill Gates from the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, the very most recent, as of last week, outgoing chair of the Board of Supervisors, who played just a pivotal role in administering this last election in Maricopa County and has served the county for years. Bill Gates, welcome.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, well, there we go. There I am up there on the screen. Thank you so much for having me. And Mindy, thanks for that data. That I'm feeling good about some of our efforts after reviewing the data that you just presented.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Glad it can be helpful. So I'm going to just dive into some questions here and really look forward to the conversation. So first of all, what impact did the 2020 election challenges have on your planning for the 2022 elections?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank everyone for participating today. I want to thank More Perfect Issue 1 and Citizen Data for putting this on. I think it's a really worthwhile exercise to kind of see what learnings we can get from what we've gone through here in Arizona and Maricopa County in particular over the past few years. So I would say what we went through in 2020 and 2021, because remember, that's when the Cyber Ninja audit was going on. So this started with our certification of the vote in November of 2020, and then really has gone nonstop through the end of 2022. And it had a significant impact on how we handled the 2022 election. After the experience of the audit, and to get to your point of responding to misinformation, that became an important part of what we do here at Maricopa County. In fact, when the Cyber Ninjas in the Arizona State Senate would conduct their so-called hearings, presenting their so-called findings, we were live tweeting, responding to the misinformation. So to put a fine point on it, what we did was we created a communications center for the 2022 election. So we went from one person on our communications staff in 2020 to 15 to 20. And we were holding press conferences on a weekly basis in the 6 weeks before the November election. And as most people know, I think we then continued to hold those press conferences on a daily basis during the election week. So we understood how important it was to respond to this misinformation. We knew we could never compete with people on social media who have 1, 2, 3, 10 million followers. But what we can do is utilize sort of that structure of government via a press conference and utilizing those in the media to get our message out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, would you say that having this role of having to counter disinformation, was that a significant change in your job that happened since 2020?
Very significant change in my job. First of all, some election boards, that's all they do. Here in Maricopa County, the Board of Supervisors, we, along with our county recorder, Stephen Richer, we run elections along with being in 50 other lines of business. And so as a result, elections has required much more attention from all of us on the board. And in particular, responding to misinformation has become a constant job for us, literally on a daily basis. And that's what we've found, and your data appears to bear that out, that we have to continue to put out messages that are accurate and detailed. And you know what? We have faith in our voters. And again, your data is supporting this, that they will take time to read and to understand, and many times to be able to respond to those maybe election deniers who were in their family. You know, a lot of these discussions occur on the family or neighborhood level. And so we're proud to have the opportunity to provide those folks with the facts.
Yeah, I mean, elections and election administration really did become kind of a top of mind issue in a way that it hadn't been for voters previously. So what was the most challenging aspects of having major officials and candidates casting doubt on the election process? You know, it's one thing to have kind of conspiracy theorists out there, but when you have officials and candidates that are casting doubt, what kind of impact did that have, both in the buildup and the aftermath of Election Day?
So the spreading of misinformation by elected officials, as a Republican, it saddens me to say, by Republican elected officials, had a significant impact on our election. And the main reason is because of what happened on Election Day. So as we all know, those of us in elections know, there isn't such a thing as a perfect election. And we certainly had a significant challenge in November of 2022 with the printers and the tabulators, people trying to put their ballots into the tabulators and that not being accepted at about 20% of our voting places. But here's the deal. We have a backup. We have a backup, which is known as door 3. So if a voter can't put their ballot and have it accepted by the tabulator, they could put it in door 3. Stephen Richer and I put out a video that actually received over 1 million views early on Election Day. We told people it's all right if you can't put it in the tabulator, put it in door 3. This is actually how it's done in the majority of Arizona counties. But here's the problem. Was that we had elected officials who for years had been saying, don't listen to your elections officials. They're trying to rig these elections. So we had people, unfortunately, who were unwilling to listen to that message. In addition, some of these elected officials were literally putting the wrong information out there. So they were telling people, whatever you do, don't put your ballot in door 3 because it either won't be counted at all or it won't be counted for weeks. So that direct involvement and this flood of misinformation on Election Day led to longer lines at the polls and frustration.
Yeah, but it sounds like you relied on a strategy of facts. So you knew what the facts were, you got them out, you transparency, the video, and then your role as an official. You were the official administering the election. Is that kind of characterize the approach that you took?
Yeah, it does. We had learned, and if we hadn't gone through what we did in 2020 and 2021, it would have looked differently. But because we knew transparency was the key, we all believe in that here in Maricopa County, we held those press conferences with significant viewership. And the beauty of it was that people were able to hear about things in real time. And I've been very gratified to have people come up to me in the past few weeks and they say, thank you for doing that. I learned something about elections. I learned something about how elections are run in Maricopa County. So you can sit here, you can twist yourself into pretzels, but the bottom line is the way to deal with this misinformation is to provide more transparency, to provide more facts. As long as the American people and the people of Arizona are focused on elections, they're hungry for this information. And we're going to continue to put it out there. And we could not have done it if it were not for our partners on social media, our partners in the traditional media who helped us get that word out there.
Well, and it seems like both from what you're sharing and the data supports that it really was effective. It's difficult, but was effective. What are some misconceptions, still you think about the way that Arizona or maybe Maricopa County elections are run?
The biggest issue that we dealt with here in November of 2022 is that we take too long. We take longer than anyone else to count our votes. And we understand people are anxious in these close races to find out who has won. But there's a confusion out there, I think, when people say this race hasn't been called for one person or the other. That's not a thing. It's not a thing. It's a media construct. I respect the value that people put in that. But in the end, it's only the Board of Supervisors or election boards who will actually canvass and say, this person won. But we know people want results and we respect that. But in actuality, we really don't take that much longer than anyone else to count our votes, but it's because these elections are so close in Arizona and there's so much attention being paid. And then secondly, another element of that is because of the mail-in votes that we allow people to drop off on election day. Because of the signature verification process that occurs, it does take several days to count all those votes. But we measure up quite favorably with those other states that allow mail-in voting, which is particularly prominent in the West. So that was something that we definitely wanted to get the word out and try and push back. Well, let's get compared to Florida. And the other thing I would add to is mail voting. People have concerns about mail-in voting, about the integrity of it. But the reality is that here in Arizona, we've been doing mail-in voting since the early 90s. And now about 85% of our votes are cast by mail-in voting. We've got the signature verification process and other factors to ensure the integrity of that process. So we want to make sure that people understand that, and we'll continue to push back against that misconception as well.
That's excellent. So what are some key things you would like to see done, if anything, to improve elections even further? You kind of said yourself that even with how well run that they are, that, they're not perfect. Are there things you'd like to see done to improve them, or just to build even more confidence among voters?
We need to have a continued and expanded professionalization of elections administration. And I think we're seeing more of that. We're very fortunate to have Scott Jarrett as our co-elections director, who reports directly to the Board of Supervisors, and more of that going on. I think we need more of an investment, both from the state level and the federal level, in the infrastructure that's required to make sure that our elections can remain safe. And also to this issue of the safety of our elections workers. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of threats towards elections workers, and I am grateful to our Maricopa County Sheriff here, federal law enforcement and local law enforcement, who stood up an incredible effort to help our elections workers feel safe. And because of that, they continue to come out. But that level of security, I think, is going to have to be maintained and bolstered in the years ahead until we start to have more elected officials speaking out, saying that this is wrong, to threaten elections workers, to threaten elected officials. It can't go on. We saw the case in New Mexico yesterday with the arrest of the individual who was targeting elected officials. This can't go on. And so it is going to require a commitment, both in infrastructure, in resources, and a commitment to doing what's right. We need to get back to that. And if we do that, I am confident that we will be in good shape. And then the final thing too is, for those of us who continue to conduct in-person voting, like we do in Maricopa County, we're going to need more facilities to hold the voting. Unfortunately, there are churches and schools out there that are shying away from it now because of the threats that are involved. So if we can bring the temperature down, bring this the vitriol down, then hopefully we'll be able to get more locations to conduct voting in people's communities, because we stand behind a hybrid form here in Maricopa County where people can vote in person early, vote in person on election day, or vote by mail. We want to have all those options continue to be available to our residents.
That's wonderful. Final just question for you. What can partner organizations or just the broader community do to support you and the Board of Supervisors in your role of administering elections?
Well, I appreciate, putting on events like this are helpful, continuing to get the word out between the elections. And I definitely am looking to our business community to stand up. We've been asking for that, and speak out when people are spreading lies, spreading misinformation about how our elections are conducted. So we'll continue to put the information out there, but to the extent that organizations, businesses, faith groups can amplify the message of what's really going on in elections, it will put us in a better stead for 2024, because we anticipate it will be another difficult cycle with a lot of misinformation, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, we'll all keep doing our work, and we know you will as well. Thank you so much, Supervisor Gates, for joining us. Thank you so much for your service, and we look forward to being in touch and supporting you along the way.
Thank you.
So now I'm going to turn it over to Nick Penniman, the CEO of Issue One, to bring in our panel. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Mindy, and a real special thanks to Bill. He mentioned the security of election workers. He's too humble and too much of a public servant probably to mention that he was taken to an undisclosed location during the counting of the votes after the last election. And we all owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude. I just can't imagine a job. I don't think anyone on the Zoom call can imagine a job where every 2 years or so, if when hiring you, they said you might have to be taken to an undisclosed location, you and your family, and you'll have repeated death threats as you do this job. Would you take the job? But people like Bill Gates take the job, and they stick with the job despite all of that. So thanks again, Bill. We'd now like to do a panel and talk about how we can continue to enhance trust in the 2024 elections. As previously heard, on today's panel, we've got Patty Ferguson-Bohnee from the Sandra Day O'Connor School of Law at ASU, Ben Ginsberg from the Election Official Legal Defense Network, and Yvonne Wingett Sanchez of the Washington Post. My first question for each of you is kind of a larger, almost existential question, which is, did you ever expect to have to do work on trust in American elections? I'll start with Ben, actually, because Ben lived through the crucible of the 2000 election.
Well, Nick, thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for having this excellent panel discussion. And it's always an honor to be on a program with Bill Gates, who, along with many of his colleagues around the country, really did make the difference in our elections over the last few cycles. So the answer to your question, Nick, having gone through the Florida 2000 election, was that there was a considerable need and effort to restore trust after that. I think it was ultimately successful. You know, the Bush re-election in 2004 and then the 2 Obama victories, I think generally did restore trust. You know, I would have guessed that would have been enough for both parties to recognize that our elections were accurate, especially after Donald Trump won once in 2016. But no, I never thought that we would get to the level of having to restore trust, really because of what the President of the United States, let alone presidential candidate, said about the system, and said it without any proof, any evidence. So it's not clear what you can address to satisfy and to restore trust when the attacks on trust have so little basis, have no basis in fact.
Patty, what about you?
Yeah, I think basically from, you know, a perspective, people look to the US as a functioning democracy. And when individuals don't accept the election results, there's a problem with the democracy. And I don't think, as people who study the law in the United States, that this is anything that we were anticipating, that we would have a president who wouldn't accept the election results. In general, with regards to trust in the elections and election results, I think that we have a lot of disenfranchised communities who've had challenges with trusting the election process because they haven't been part of it for so long. But I think as a leader in democracy and observing elections in other countries, that I don't think that this trend is something that we were expecting. And I think that we have to take the time to rebuild the trust through that education and work through this, because it's very important to the future of our democracy.
Yvonne, I know you don't work on it as an advocate, obviously, but you cover it as a reporter. What about you? Could you have imagined, 4 or 6 years ago, writing as many stories as you had to about election denialism and the lack of trust in the results of American elections? Oh, you got to demute.
You'd think 3 years into this, I would anticipate that. There's always been an element of mistrust, right, in government and in elected officials. And I think we might see maybe a deeper sense of that here in Arizona, given our sort of political identity or political history. But specifically on the issue of elections and election administrations, no. We are, at a point now where before you can even have a conversation about a policy or an election or a candidate, a campaign, with some people, you have to have a debate as to whether or not you can even characterize somebody as a governor, as the president of the United States. And so before you can even get to a question about pretty basic feelings and people's personal feelings about, again, inflation, the economy, illegal immigration, border security, you have to have a debate about the legitimacy of the winners of American and local elections. And, we're in a place at this point here in Arizona where we live in separate realities. And when you have to debate the truth, that's a pretty scary place to be.
I wonder what you all think about the future of election denialism. When we all were growing up as Americans, we were told that there's a winner and there's a loser, and the loser has to pick themselves up, shake the winner's hand, and then move on with their lives. And that's kind of what the founders said too, when they were conceiving of a democratic republic. But denialism has now become a phenomenon in the last 6 years, particularly in the last 2, and we've seen it in spades in Arizona. Ben, most of the election deniers who ran for office for positions of election administration, especially in the swing states, were defeated. Plenty of deniers were still elected around the country. But do you think that the phenomenon of denialism, the kind of tactic of denialism, is fading, or do you think that the fire is still raging? You got to demute also. Try again, Ben. There you go.
I believe that the fever has broken, but we're certainly not out of the woods. And I think the virus is still in the body politic and very capable of mutations. I think that there are a couple of keys. One will be some post-election polling to see if we're still at roughly 30% of the country that doesn't believe in elections. It's important to note that while you're absolutely right that it was not a successful strategy in battleground states. In point of fact, no incumbent who embraced election denialism lost on any level. So it's hard to know. I think one of the real keys will be whether election denialism is still sort of the cost of admission for running in a Republican primary. And we may not know that for a while. It's also true that on the county level in a number of states, election deniers did win, so that the problems in the 2024 election have certainly not been resolved.
Yeah. By the way, folks, for those who are watching this, you can start populating the Q&A with questions, which I'd love to get to in about 10 minutes. Patty, we just heard Bill lay out a bunch of ideas about how to improve trust in Arizona elections. If you had to pick the top 2 or 3, either laws that need to be passed in Arizona or things that need to be improved upon, what would they be to improve trust?
So, I mean, I think the things that they're doing in Maricopa County with public education are very important. Getting the facts out, those are very important. I think one of the things that happened the last legislative cycle was there were a lot of bills that were introduced to change the goalpost. And I think when there are changes to the elections in the under the integrity or guise of voter integrity, but they really disenfranchise people, that we need to continue to be concerned about that. And I'll just give you an example. One is 2492, which requires documentary proof of residency for voting. And for most tribal people in Arizona, they do not have that. So that would impact them in the voter process. And so I'm speaking from the view of tribal voters that trust that has been built up over time, which is already lacking, begins to erode even further. So I think that a lot of our public officials need to be educated about the impacts these laws will have on voters in Arizona, not just city voters, but also rural voters and tribal voters. I think adopting strategies to combat this election misinformation is really important because voters are hearing information from all sorts of areas. So having your elected officials speak these facts, I think, are very important. So I think those are some things that can be done. I think that another example is that there was a law that was passed to eliminate grant funding for counties who, for their election purposes. And we have some poor counties in Arizona. So that could impact transforming to allow the same type of opportunities for voters outside of large counties such as Maricopa and Penniman County. So that's very unfortunate. And obviously I have lots of thoughts on laws that impact voters and their access to the ballot box. And I think that we should be moving towards expanding the ballot box, not restricting the ballot box. And I think the language that people use is important with regards to those discussions.
Great. Yvonne, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about one of Bill's suggestions around the professionalization of election administration. I assume that in your reporting, you interviewed both professional election administrators like Bill, but probably also people who are volunteers. And I'm wondering, from the perspective of a reporter, if that would be an important priority moving forward, because I think all of us who have seen the process up close have seen that it is complicated, that volunteers are amazing, but they're oftentimes asked to do things that are kind of above their skill set. And now they're in the bright white hot spotlight of election denialism and scrutiny and social media with every single move they make. So did you, throughout the course of your reporting, did you find that there were people who, would benefit from greater professionalization of election administration? And do you think that would then affect trust also?
I think professionalization in any area is a good thing. And I think that especially newcomers to the election administration process benefit from seeing it from the inside out. And I think that they can be, and I've seen them be, ambassadors to the system, to their friends, their neighbors, people they go to church with. What I see as the biggest problem is just a complete disconnection from government. The White House, Congress is 2,000 miles away. People aren't paying attention to what is happening over there. There's just so much fighting. It's complicated to follow. They might be a little bit more engaged on the statewide level, but not a whole lot. When it comes to the county level, they are, usually the county is doing something that you don't really want to be involved in. They run jails, they run the sheriff's office, law enforcement. And so there just seems to be a complete disconnect from government. I think that's the biggest problem. The second problem is voting and election administration is very complex. It's so nuanced. It's hard to follow. And so many people just figure, why bother? And until there is a way to simplify the system or communicate the system in a simpler way to voters, non-voters, constituents, I just think we're going to be in this position for a long time. And I would kind of disagree with the premise, at least here in Arizona, that things are getting better. Yes, we did see statewide officers lose their election or candidates lose their election, but we saw a lot of legislative candidates pick up seats who do not believe that our governor, our attorney general, our secretary of state are duly elected officials representing the state of Arizona. I think it's actually going to get worse before it gets better.
Then back to the notion of kind of professionalization and also the resources needed to administer elections in this country. Would you advocate for expanded federal funding of elections? And if so, would you try to put any kind of incentives or mandates on that funding, or would you just kind of release it to the states to do what they want to do with it? Demute, Ben.
I would certainly advocate for federal funding for elections. I mean, probably the most successful nationwide improvement in election infrastructure occurred after the Florida recount, when the Help America Vote Act was passed and related bills. And there was money spent around the country that truly improved things. Incentives are always good, but I think it gets really tricky on the federal level because political agendas can creep into the incentives, and those political agendas get in the way of passing the needed money. So I think I would be more in favor of block grants to the individual states to be able to have the states figure out how the money would best be used. When I was on a presidential commission a few years ago about elections, the professional election administrators who we talked to emphasized time and again, within elections, one size does not fit all. And I think you have to remember that when you start talking about the way the feds disperse money. That also doesn't absolve states and counties from their responsibility to help fund election infrastructure in their communities.
Patty, given what Yvonne just said about how things have gotten worse in the state legislature, there are more state legislators who don't believe in basically the Katie Hobbs is legitimately elected. Do you see any possibility for significant legislation to move forward in the state of Arizona anytime soon? And if so, is there like a deal to be struck? And what would that deal be?
Well, I think, first of all, last cycle, we had a number of bills that were set out to suppress voting in the state of Arizona. I think the current state that we're in, which I mean, the status that we're in, is that we have a governor who can veto some of these bills if they're moving forward. So I think that's positive, but people who are impacted will need to make sure that they identify those impacts. And sometimes in these committee hearings, people aren't allowed to speak. They cut off people from speaking so they can't get evidence on the record. And so that's very unfortunate. So people who are on the ground are going to have to be very vocal about those issues, because there could be things that are being recommended, again, as I say, as voter integrity, but they really are going to disenfranchise some people. I think that there's an opportunity with the election manual to have an election manual revised and put in place, because during the last round of elections that was not updated, because all the Secretary of State, the Governor, and Attorney General couldn't all agree. I think that we can have that now, and we could have some clear guidance. I think when you don't have an updated election manual, which also happened in a previous administration, that that's also challenging for the poll workers, because things change, there's modernization, and they may not necessarily be addressed in the election procedures manual. So I think that it's true, we have to be vigilant. We have to pay attention, we have to be vigilant, and we have to propose solutions. I will say there is a proposal to not allow late early ballots being dropped off, and that would be very harmful to many voters, including tribal voters who don't have access to mail at their homes, or it could take 12 days for something to be received via the post office. So if you're not allowed to drop off that ballot, then it's likely that you won't be able to participate in that election if you vote by mail. So I think bringing those issues to light and being able to participate in those discussions are very important.
Mm-hmm. Yvonne, back to you and the kind of disinformation, misinformation environment that we're all living in right now. I mean, you're living in the center of it, right? Trying to sort fact from fiction, trying to interview people who aren't reading your paper and probably aren't reading some of the local papers. I mean, just give the audience a sense of what it's like to be a reporter in this hurricane of disinformation and misinformation, where, you know, my guess is there are people on Twitter who have 5 times the readership, so to speak, that your articles have.
Well, I would encourage viewers to take a look at a piece that I wrote along with a colleague of mine, Isaac Stanley Becker. I think it published the Sunday before the election in the Post, and it sort of talked about this and talked about one of the big influencers in this misinformation realm, Turning Point and its affiliates, and key figures tied to Turning Point, which is a a group that supports Trump that's based here in Phoenix. Charlie Kirk is the head, and various players are here on the ground, including Tyler Boyer, who runs operations. Those are big names in the conservative movement. They're big names here in Arizona, and they have sort of taken over the state Republican Party over the last 4 to 6 years. And what we've seen and what we documented in our piece is sort of the rise of misinformation, in part through some of these figures. And it is difficult to parse through or to start at a place, first of all, where you have actual facts and you are making decisions based on facts, especially when you're dealing with people who follow these accounts and take what these people say at complete face value without questioning anything that these people are saying. And they're not alone. More and more people are not watching the news, it seems. They're not watching local television. They're not listening to drive time radio. They are siloed in their own belief systems. They're watching Steve Bannon's show. They're watching Right Side Media. They have moved to streaming services as a way to cut their cable bill. They don't have the time or the appetite for local news. They're getting it from social media. It used to be that a state lawmaker would put something on his or her social media account, and you could sort of probably trust it, that it was actually true. There was a little bit of trust that these elected officials were actually being honest with the information that they were putting out. Now you have to question everything. There was a post just the other day that went viral on MLK Day accusing our governor of being racist and of hiring only white budget officials on her staff. They put the picture out there, it went viral, it was seen by millions of people, but what they didn't say is that that was a picture of our governor standing with almost all of the budget staffers that were hired by Doug Ducey. And that is a narrative now that is spun out there that people actually believe without question. It's gone unrebutted for the most part. And I'm not really sure how you begin to reach people and you begin to cut through when you are confronted with people who just aren't civically engaged when it comes to the news and the facts. And it's like, it's one person at a time, I suppose. But it really is the long game. And there's a lot of opportunity for people who are interested in actually spreading the news and reaching these people where they're at.
Yeah, and we've all been watching the stories about Chat GPT for the last couple of weeks. One of the remarkable things about these chatbots is how authoritatively they write, which is exactly what search engines pick up on. They pick up on that kind of language. So I think your job, unfortunately, is going to get harder because those who are out there who want to propagate lies can now do so very quickly and in a language that is very appealing to the algorithms that scrub, and scan the internet. John Ralston asked a question in the chat. I have no idea what the answer would be, but I wonder if one of you three do. He says, I know there are statutory requirements for representatives from the Democratic and Republican parties to volunteer to fulfill oversight roles in elections. Do both parties provide enough volunteers to fulfill those positions? Any clue if there's a shortage? Yvonne?
I believe in 2020, there was a shortage. Correct me if I'm wrong, Supervisor Gates, but if I recall reading through your guys's records from 2020, there were complaints from the Republican Party chair, Kelly Ward, to county officials, including Supervisor Gates, about not having enough volunteers. I think that this was also an issue that Maricopa County, at least, was confronted with in 2022, and there was some litigation that sort of revolved around this volunteer issue.
Yeah, so if I can add on that, that's right, Yvonne. We historically have had challenges getting Republican election workers, but I'm very pleased to announce that in 2022, we had, in fact, there was a lawsuit where the Republicans were saying we were violating the law because we had more Democrat election workers than Republicans. In the end, we had near parity. And so the reason for that, the credit for that goes to both the county Republican officials and the county Democrat officials who did actually an incredible job of getting us volunteers for the 2022 election. Observers, and election workers.
And Nick, it's always an honor to answer a question from the legendary John Ralston. But I think as a nationwide matter, it varies tremendously state by state and really election to election, as parties just have difficulties in some elections rather than others, recruiting volunteers for all aspects, including watching the polls. One thing that you can say about the election deniers is that they did help fulfill the need for voluntary poll workers and poll watchers in unprecedented ways, which is something to be celebrated, that there were sufficient volunteers in most locations.
Bill, because you're back on the screen, I'm going to throw the final question to you, which is, what can people who are listening to this do to assist in reinstilling trust in the 2024 election? What do you need?
So we encourage people to get the facts, and because this is, Yvonne said that it's person by person. It is person by person. And a lot of times this is on a family level, especially as Republicans. I think I talked to a lot of Republicans who, speak the truth on these issues. They have challenges in their own families or their neighbors. So learn the facts. If you're not registered to vote, register to vote. And if this is an important issue I'm not asking people to be single issue voters, but if this is important, look at where people are on this particular issue, and then finally give money to those candidates who tell the truth and push back. And finally, if you know people who run businesses and are involved in chambers, encourage the chambers to get involved and speak out and not sit it out. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of that. A lot of people sitting it out on the sidelines, and that's part of the reason that we are where we are.
Thank you, Bill, Patty, Yvonne, Ben. Appreciate all the work that all of you do. Thank you for the audience. And these conversations will continue. So happy afternoons to everyone. See ya.